Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining today's national meeting session on body-worn cameras in correctional settings. My name is Quinn Patterson, and I'm a senior research specialist working with CNA and BJA's body-worn camera training and technical assistance program. Before we start, I'd like to go over a few helpful tips as we begin the session. First, please keep your phones or computer audio on mute so that we can avoid some background noise. This session will be recorded so that you can view it later on our website. If you have a question to ask the panelists, please use the chat function and direct your question to the host. You can also send a message at any time during the session. To access the chat function, if you're using your computer, it's located at the bottom center of your screen. If you're using your mobile device, it's at the top right corner of your screen. Also, please edit your display name by hovering over your name, clicking More, choosing the Rename option, and changing your screen name to reflect your full name, title, and agency. This helps us ensure that we mark you down for your grant requirement. After the meeting, we're also going to give you an opportunity to evaluate it. So please do provide your input on this and other sessions because it'll help improve our future events. As a reminder, the points or views or opinions expressed herein don't necessarily represent the official position or policies of the U.S. Department of Justice. Thank you very much. And again, please reach out using the chat function or email us at bwctta@cna.org if you have any questions throughout the session. And now I'm going to pass it off to Brittany Cunningham.
Thanks, Quinn. Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Dr. Brittany Cunningham. I'm the Body-Worn Camera Project Manager and also the Assistant Director of CNA's Center for Justice Research and Innovation. Over the past several years, we've seen tremendous growth in body-worn camera technology, but also in their utility. Body-worn cameras are being utilized in more ways than ever before. We see their expansion due to the call from communities for transparency, accountability, legitimacy, but we're also seeing a call for more procedural justice. And we're starting to see that call in corrections, whether that's adult detention centers, state correctional facilities, and even jails. So for the next 15 minutes, I want to engage our panelists and all of you in a conversation about the best practices of implementing body-worn cameras in correctional settings. Before we get started, I do want to introduce you to my co-facilitator today, Dr. Chip Coldren, the director of the Body-Worn Camera PIP TTA program and the director of CNA Center for Justice Research and Innovation. And Chip, I'm going to pause for a couple minutes if you'd like to provide any opening comments, and then we'll turn it over to our panelists for introductions.
All right. Thank you, Brittany. Yeah, I think that, just by way of introduction, I am the director of the center. I work with Brittany on body-worn cameras. I've been involved in body-worn cameras since the inception of this program. But I do want to say that in a past life, I did work in corrections. I was a deputy administrator for a maximum security prison for several years, and I was involved in the consent decree, one of the longest standing consent decrees in corrections at the Cook County Jail. So I was involved on the monitoring team for that consent decree for a number of years. And I'll just say this, Brittany and I have been involved in some research around body-worn cameras in corrections, and we have watched with great interest how body-worn cameras have made their way into correctional facilities. And clearly, the folks here have demonstrated strong leadership in this implementation challenge and in these programs. I'll just say one other quick thing. There's a number of ways that we have seen that cameras have come into play in correctional facilities. It's more than putting cameras on officers and on deputies. Certainly, they've been used for a long time to document cell extractions and other kinds of critical incidents in facilities. We've seen them used for cell and contraband searches. We've seen them used in intake. We're starting to learn, and we'll learn a little bit today, about how they're being implemented in parole and field services, transportation units. I've heard of some unique links of body-worn cameras to drone systems in sheriff's offices. So it's a pretty rich field, actually. And we would like to just bring out these experiences during this session today. So Brittany, thank you very much.
Thanks, Chip. I'm going to turn it over to our panelists to give quick introductions of themselves and their agencies. Major Miller, would you mind giving us an introduction and getting us kicked off?
Okay, Robert Miller. I'm a major with the Sheriff's Office in Davidson County, North Carolina. I oversee the Field Services Bureau for the next 5 days.
Thank you. I think you're getting ready to retire, so we appreciate you being here. Superintendent Beebe.
Hi, my name is Mike Beebe. I work for the Ohio Department of Corrections. My current role is I'm a deputy superintendent with Parole and Community Services. I have 30 years in. I've worked on both sides of the house. I was a deputy warden at 2 high security institutions, parole officer, parole supervisor, regional administrator. And in April of 21, I was tapped to be the project manager for the pilot and implementation of the body worn camera project here in Ohio.
Thank you. Ms. Grigsby, if you can hear us and unmute, would you mind providing an introduction?
Hello, Tomika Grigsby. I am a law enforcement program coordinator with the Department of Juvenile Justice in Georgia. And I've been with them since 2010, and we began implementing body-worn cameras in 2019.
Thank you. So thank you all for being here and having a conversation with us today. We really do also want to hear from those who are participating today. So please do feel free to put your comments that you have for the panelists or for Chip and I into the chat, or if you want to raise your hand, we can unmute you. One of the things we wanted to start out with is to really see who is on I was going to say the line, but I guess virtually connected with us today. I see there are 102 people on, so we're hoping, and I think some might have a couple of things to say today. We're going to start out with a couple of poll questions that we're going to ask. So Heliana, would you mind putting up the first poll question for us? So if you guys would, those in attendance, if you wouldn't mind responding, do you have BWCs implemented in your correctional facility? And we're just going to give that a couple seconds for folks to respond. I can see the numbers changing. Okay, so it looks like yes, 35% of you say yes, and then 39 just say not applicable, but you're interested in the topic. So I want to ask something specific of those of you, the 35 or percent that do have body worn cameras implemented. Heliana, would you mind putting the second poll question up, please? So if you do have BWCs implemented, do you have BWCs also implemented for your field work or parole? So it looks like the majority of you are saying yes. I can see the number changing. So 70, 67, it was at 71%, 68%. So the majority of you do, which is great. I know that the superintendent on with us today has been implementing body worn cameras into the field per se, as well as Ms. Grigsby in Georgia, you guys have too. So we can take our poll question down. Thank you guys so much. There's one other thing that we want everybody to kind of think about as we go through the session today. One of the questions we often ask with TTA is, our TTA sites is, what can we help you with? Or what else can CNA or BJA do? Or what other resources would be helpful, particularly in corrections as it relates to body worn cameras? So that's a question I'm going to ask all of our panelists at the end, but I'd also like those who are participating to also think about it. And please put your ideas in the chat feature and we'll capture those. So again, the question is just, what other TTA resources will be helpful to you in your organization in corrections? We know that funding is always one, but if you have other ideas, please let us know. And so I'm going to start with a couple of questions that Chip and I will pose to the panelists. But again, please either raise your hand or put questions in the chat. We want to make sure we get you all the expertise we can today in the next, I guess, maybe 40 minutes here. So I'm going to direct our first question to Superintendent Beebe. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the technologies that you have embedded? I don't know if that's technically the right word, but that you've utilized with body worn cameras, such as your automatic triggers that you use and those sorts of things.
So when we did our proof of concept, that was one of the requirements of our proof of concept with Director Chambers Smith, who supported the body worn camera project, is that we needed some type of trigger that would turn on the body worn camera automatically without the officer having to do so during a critical incident. So during our pilot project at OSP, Ohio State Penitentiary, our Supermax, our IT specialist working with our vendor developed a switch, which in the event of a man down, a switch can be flipped and everybody responding to that critical incident, their body worn cameras would automatically turn on. We're also in the process of piloting at 2 institutions right now our man down system. So if an officer presses their man down, that would again automatically trigger body worn cameras. The other trigger we have is when an officer in the field with our parole staff draws their weapon, their body worn camera automatically goes on and Likewise, in the institution, when an officer would pull their pepper, their body-worn camera system would go on to take that action away from the officer in the event of a high-stress critical incident.
Thank you, Superintendent. Major Miller, anything to add?
We studied the triggers. We chose not to do them. We just wrote a very stringent policy that any encounter, the camera has to be on, or there's going to be some repercussions internally for not following the policies.
Ms. Grigsby, what about Georgia DOC?
So we implemented the trigger of if there is an incident and one officer starts their recording on their camera, if the other officers are close in the vicinity, it will automatically turn on their cameras and link their Bluetooth together.
Thank you. I see there is one comment in the chat about sharing policies. Emily, we do have a variety of policies from correctional settings. I think over the grant period, PIP has funded we might be at 6 or 7 correctional facilities and a couple other sheriff's offices, such as Major Miller's, that have implemented in jails. And we can get you those example policies. I just see it in the chat, and then I noted your sites. We can get those to you. Moving on to another thing we wanted to ask, and Major Miller, I'll kind of throw this question to you. Can you tell us a little bit about your correction staff or your deputy staff's current perceptions of body-worn cameras in your jail?
It did take a little bit, but for them to get used to it and not get out of, like we said, a lot of us panelists have said, you had the concept or the mindset of, oh, y'all are just spying on us. And what helped with that was a T&E session. We T&E'd for several months with different companies and telling all our people, our detention officers and our deputies, our patrol deputies, this is a T&E. This is so you can get used to it. This is to safeguard you along with the public. It's not a spy tool. That's not what we're out there doing. It didn't take but a little bit, and they got used to, wow, this is really protecting us. It's here to protect the public too, but we see it now where it is protecting us, and it's helping us in report data and things like that.
And we'll come back to in just a minute about when you talk about report data, but Superintendent Beebe, anything to add here?
Yes, so we have a union. Transparency is of the utmost importance. We were very transparent. We encouraged their input, and with our Director Chambers Smith, we put it on management staff before we even rolled it out to the field. So management had it on and was operating it at least a month and a half prior to us ever introducing it to the field. Having open dialogue with the people that are going to be wearing the body-worn cameras and leading by example, I think was one of our successes here in Ohio.
And when you talk about open dialogue, I know you had mentioned, at least to me before, I think that you did those with each region. So I know in Ohio, you've implemented body-worn cameras statewide, and you've got, I think, 5 or 6 regions. I can't remember the exact number now, but can you talk a little bit about what that open dialogue looked like? Did you go to them? Did you do it virtually? Or is it really just kind of more informal or casual conversations with folks?
No, we, myself and Brian Palmer, who's the body-worn camera administrator, the two of us went to all 28 institutions and 6 parole regions, and we actually did the training. We were the subject matter experts. We knew that the information that we were going to be sharing was legitimate information, and we were extremely transparent with our staff when asked questions. So that's part of the transparency, having those that are going to ask your officers, your staff to wear the body-worn cameras. Make sure you have the subject matter experts out in the field that can answer the question, because like the major said, as soon as you say you don't know, then the conspiracy theory starts.
Ms. Grigsby, what about in Georgia? Can you tell us a little bit about the correctional staff's perceptions and maybe whether it changed over time or if it stayed consistent or what you're seeing there?
Oh, it definitely changed over time. In the beginning, we started off talking about it, body-worn cameras, implementing them for maybe about 6 to 9 months. And then the following year, we did a pilot program where we had selected people from 4 different regions And then we had selected 5 people under them in different levels of capacity of job responsibilities. So we did that for about a year and got a lot of feedback. And then the following year, we actually started implementing. We started with train the trainer, and we also really worked hard on how to deliver the message, how to deliver the implementation. So currently, I think the perception is really good. I think that they welcome them now, and they see it as a means of protection and an additional resource of information during incidents.
When you say you worked on delivering that message, how did you do that? Did you do them at staff meetings or at roll calls, or were they messages sent by the superintendent, or how did you go about that?
We did everything. We did it informally. We did it formally. We started talking about it with our training center. We started talking about it in our different meetings that we had in different departments. So we just approached it from different angles. And I think having the officers themselves be involved from the very beginning, we developed a committee and we talked about discussing it in a positive, constructive manner. So we did it all kind of ways, informally, formally, during meetings. We developed policy committees. And we understood that the message and how it's delivered, it will affect how it's received.
I really like that idea because you said you're coming at it at different ways. And this is, as a researcher, I will say sometimes we collect multiple forms of data, right? To say we triangulate data. And that's, I guess, like a really cheesy research joke, but that's kind of what we do, right? To show evidence and come at it at different ways. And I really like that you mentioned that. And it kind of goes into one of the other areas I wanted to talk about today, that Chip and I want to talk about today with stakeholders. And you mentioned you developed a committee, which, right, is more than you, it's more than your administrators, it's your training division that you talked about, and it's all these other people. And one of the things, and I'll start with you, Ms. Grigsby, let's go back to you. If you think about who your stakeholders are as it relates to body-worn cameras in your correctional facility, can you tell us who they are, who you worked with as it related to your policy and implementation, and why?
So we rolled it out first, mainly in the community. So we involved courts, so we're a Department of Juvenile Justice. So we're kind of unique in the sense where we work with juveniles. So of course we had to go out and discuss with the high schools, have meetings with them. We talked about parents because we have parole and probation officers who are going inside homes. So we had a couple of parents on our committee, which was very interesting. We had a couple of youth from the facilities and from the in the community to get their feedback as well. We involved DFACs, we involved the court, we involved our legal department, we involved our investigations department, board members. It took a lot of work. So we tried to get feedback from everyone.
Chip, you might have something to follow up here.
If I can take a minute, I would like to just pursue this line for a second.
Yeah.
We had an interesting conversation with several chiefs yesterday about community engagement with body-worn cameras. And one of the questions we asked them was, when you engaged with community members in the implementation process and policy development, were there issues that they brought to the table that you hadn't necessarily thought of that you responded to? Mm-hmm. So Tamika, I want to ask you, if I could for a minute, since you had the parents and the youth there, are there issues that came up in those conversations that you responded to that you hadn't necessarily thought of beforehand?
Absolutely. So with their feedback, we understood their concern with our officers possibly videotaping inside of their home, which is their personal space. So we, along with their help and some of their feedback, implemented in our policy that they must notify the parents or anyone in the home that they have a body-worn camera. And at the time, if they need to start recording, to notify them that they're recording. We also had to do that, especially in the school system, because it's a sensitive issue.
Did you have to put MOUs in place to do all of this? It's something that's come up a lot with evidence and working with kind of different stakeholders. Did you put any type of like memorandum of understanding or data sharing agreements in place with those community stakeholders once you start getting into this after implementation, I mean?
Well, not specifically for that, but some of our areas in our regions, we did include that in the MOAs. But we didn't specifically have to develop MOAs specifically for the body worn cameras.
Superintendent Beebe, what about in Ohio? Can you tell us a little bit about the stakeholders that you worked with and why?
So one of our biggest stakeholders are our federal partners with the FBI, U.S. Marshal Service, DEA, and we have developed MOUs with them, and we're currently in the process of fine-tuning those MOUs. They're not finalized yet. That's a process. As far as our other LE partners, the State Highway Patrol rolled out their body-worn camera project around the same time that we did. So they kind of paved the way for the prosecutor's office, our county prosecutor's office. We're developing partnerships with our prosecutor's office, with local law enforcement. But one thing that we're doing is we lock down our evidence. You have to have an evidentiary and investigative reason to request data. You have to be moving forward with a criminal prosecution. We're just not releasing any body-worn camera video without there being some sort of criminal prosecution that's going to be taking place. And the body-worn camera administrator, Bryant Palmer, there's only 3 or 4 people that have the ability to go ahead and click that button and share it with that community partner.
Mm-hmm.
So we know where our digital evidence is going at all times.
Thank you. Major Miller, anything to add here?
Our first stakeholders would have been definitely our county commissioners and our county attorney, but they pretty much put the ball in our court and said, you know what you're doing, you've had the training. We kept them abreast of every step we were going to take, and they were pleased with that. And with our grant, one of our 13 points that we had to follow was do some type of public service announcements to the communities. And we would talk about what day we were getting ready to go live in our county commissioner meetings that were a live feed on the internet and to the public. We would go out in the public and tell them, Monday, August the 2nd, you will see the deputies in this type of camera. If you see this little square, you're going to be being recorded. We go live at this time. We would go to different event job fairs and say, we're going live on this date. So when you see this, this is what this means on this deputy's vest.
Thank you all. I'm going to pause for 1 second to see if anybody who's participating would like to share maybe any of the community stakeholders they've worked with. I know there are a couple other DOCs on the participant list that I see here. So would anyone like to chime in on others that you've worked with that might be helpful to somebody else?
And while we're waiting, here in Ohio, we also trained our Ohio Public Defender's Office too. So they had, myself and Bryant Palmer did that training, and they had the opportunity to ask us whatever questions they had, and we were very transparent with them too. That's one thing our director is adamant about, is the transparency of body-worn cameras.
Thank you. I think that's really important. It goes back to this idea of transparency in the community that we're seeing, as I opened with. We see that a lot in law enforcement, but we're starting to see it more in corrections. I think it's always been there, the idea of transparency and wanting transparency of like this black box that we often hear as corrections, but I think it's being put more in the forefront.
I just have one more thing to interject.
Sure.
So also with our prison system and with parole, but more so with our prisons, we are developing MOUs with our local hospitals and our EMS. So they're aware of the body-worn camera through our hospital in Columbus. We've set criteria on when an officer can activate their body-worn camera and when it needs to be asleep or off, in the off kind of asleep. And we've tasked all the wardens of the 28 prisons to use their staff and develop those MOUs with their local community partners advising of the body-worn camera.
Thank you. I think that's really important to share. I'm going to pose the next question to all of you, and that's really to kind of talk about the benefits and challenges that you've had. And I know on our pre-call, we talked a lot about that. And I'll let, Tamika, maybe we'll go back to you. Can you talk a little bit first about the benefits that you've seen in your DOC with body-worn cameras over the last couple of years?
Some of the benefits, I would say first with the apprehension of the officers in the beginning, as they begin to realize the benefit for them with actually having recorded information of incidents, they were able to view the footage. We're able to view footage to make sure that just to get a more broader view or more precise view of any incident that occurred. I'll say one of the things that we did was we charged the leadership team with going in and viewing videos to find situations that were handled outstanding. So what we did was we started to give accolades to staff for doing well. So I think that kind of changed the perception of wearing the body worn cameras, but it also helps in investigations. So we see it as it's been satisfying since we started it in 2019.
And that reminds me, it was a quote that Chief Scott Hogg said yesterday, or Scott Hogg said yesterday in the, I don't know if anyone attended the compliance and audit session, and it goes back to your idea of accolades. And he said, if I'm getting the quote right, what gets recognized gets repeated. And I thought that was a really cool quote to say in the context of audit and compliance. Oh, I see he's on here now, so I'll give him props for saying that. But I think it goes back to what you're saying too, Ms. Grigsby, and you're doing it as well. So I thought that was cool, and that just came back to my mind when you were speaking. I'm getting a couple questions in the chat, but I want to just finish this idea up of benefits first, and then I'll get to the ones in the chat. But Major Miller, do you want to talk a little bit about the benefits that you guys have seen with body worn cameras?
For 16 of my 30 years, I was in internal affairs, whether it be on the patrolling section or the detention section. Having a video recording is a blessing. Every aspect of anything, whether it turn out to be bad for your agency, sometimes the bad helped you stop things before they progressed beyond a point where they couldn't be handled. Those can always be worked out. So it's just a blessing to have it. Can't say any more to the public of how it safeguards the public, but it safeguards your agents in both settings. For us at a sheriff's office, we're titled with both a detention setting and patrolling for the public. So to integrate that as one unit, it just speaks volumes.
Superintendent Beebe, anything to add?
So we're very new in the process. We just completed our rollout in June, but anecdotally, during the pilot through today, I do believe it's increased our professionalism on both sides of the house. Now they know that they're being recorded and they're actually recording themselves. So by default, it's going to increase professionalism on the institution side of the house. We have examples where inmates have walked up to officers, forgot we had body worn cameras, and as soon as that officer activates their body worn camera, the conversation changes. So I believe we're going to show a reduced amount of use of forces within our institutions. Again, everything's anecdotal, but again, just to echo what the major has said, I think there's always those collateral consequences for staff that didn't behave right to begin with. And unfortunately, sometimes staff get caught doing the wrong thing. One thing I would like to indicate in our policy, we even put in there to get rid of the conspiracy theory that minor infractions of our policy won't result in discipline, but coaching. So that helps us help them understand that this is not a gotcha moment.
Yeah, I like that. So I'm going to go to a couple questions that have been chatted to me. The first one is, did the number of violent incidences between officers or deputies or officers/deputies and inmates decrease when you introduced body worn cameras?
Brittany, I'm going to say for us in Davidson, we're a very large county. We're the largest agency within our county. I don't know that we had stats we're going to show we didn't have a lot of violence to start with. I can tell you that our use of forces, like Mr. Beebe said, our use of forces in our detention setting went to almost nothing because both sides, even our employees, knowing that, hey, we got a camera running now, we need to be on our P's and Q's. Even the inmates are understanding, hey, they got you. It's recorded. You're going to get in more trouble than what you're already in. Out on the road, not a lot of violence to say that it curbed anything. But like I told y'all in our pre-meeting, our second night of our T&E, it's sad that this happened, but we had an officer-involved shooting with a death where the deputy was attacked with a knife. And without that, our story, the whole story, I don't mean to say our story, the whole story could not have been told. With that video, it went from A to Z. There was no questions. The DA's office reviewed it and said, it's cut and dry. It's A to Z. There is no question. It's right here in your face in living color. And that was a selling back to our previous questions. That was a selling point for just about every holder in our agency of, look what it just did for us in the public.
Thanks, Major. Another question we have is directed toward, we have two questions for you, Superintendent Beebe. The first one is, you said that you wouldn't release video that wasn't related to prosecution. If you came across video of exceptional actions by a correctional officer, would they release that video to highlight those exceptional actions?
Yes, when I said we wouldn't release video, we'll release it to view, but we won't release it so they could download and share. So when I say we won't release it, I was talking on the LE side of the house, not the community side of the house. One thing that was unique with how we developed the body worn camera division is we put it under legal, who already does all our FOIA requests. So we will release our footage to anybody who's requesting it if we have a legal responsibility to do that, but we just don't allow anybody to share digital evidence within our department, if that helps.
Thank you. And then the other, it's more of a request for you, Superintendent. Is there any way you'd be able to share your implementation setup for the switch triggers at your facility? This certain sheriff's office, they have automatic trigger boxes that could do the same, but they have not engineered the setup. So they're just asking if I could put them in contact with you to share your setup.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yep.
So that was from Wake County. So I'll make sure, I think you guys are both my sites, so I'll connect you both and get you connected there to get that. Other questions from folks or comments before I move on to kind of a couple other questions Chip and I have. I'll pause for a second if anyone wants to raise their hand or put anything in the chat. So we talked a little bit about benefits. I want to talk a little bit about challenges because we all know implementing body worn cameras is not easy and it's not always the same for every correctional facility or jail or even out on the road. So Superintendent Beebe, let's go back to you. Can you talk a little bit about, the challenges that you guys have faced in Ohio with implementation?
So we had a very aggressive rollout. One thing that Brian Palmer and I did is we stuck to the map. Actually, Brian moved it up or 2 months ahead of schedule. You have to develop a plan, create a good team, and stick to that team. We know in law enforcement and corrections, we have more excuses than a few, but we need to continue and travel down that roadmap that we've designed and work through the barriers and have a good team out there that is going to be transparent and share all information, just not what they think that needs to be shared.
Thank you. Ms. Grigsby, anything to add? Can you share a little bit with us about your challenges?
I would say some of our challenges that we still currently have is charging the cameras and also docking the cameras. As the staff, we have in policy when they should dock it, how often they should dock it. Because if a camera is not docked, then the updates are not uploaded and the footage is not downloaded. So that's a continuous challenge that we have with tracking.
Did you have to change your policy at all along the way due to that challenge? I'm just curious.
Yes, we did.
Would you mind telling us a little bit about what you changed it from and then what you changed it to just help other folks on the line?
So there's different ways that we have investigation. We have different departments who use the body worn cameras. So some of the policies are geared towards specifically for different units. But I think the last update that we did was dock it every night, if possible. We know that we have some units who are out in the field for multiple days. So we also bought individual chargers, individual docking stations for them. There's different ways that they can dock. They can dock on their computer. They can upload incident immediately from their computer. But we had to make sure that we had docking stations in all locations. Of course, docking stations are geared towards these specific cameras that you have. And an example is we can't just walk into the local sheriff department and dock our cameras there. So we had to make sure that we had docking stations in a lot of areas throughout the state of Georgia, but currently they have to dock them at the end of every shift.
Thank you. Major Miller, what about challenges at Davidson County?
Echo what Superintendent said. It was a big task, but you've got to stick to what your initial plan was, and you'll get everything ironed out as long as you're all sticking letting your stakeholders understand that's why you're doing what you're doing. Really, ours was minor. We set out with our grant to be sure we had enough data storage. We had enough equipment. Even if we bought extra, we had it stored for future use. A big thing for us was, I guess you could say, mobility. Did we have it in the right area on their body so we could see what we needed to be seeing? We did do some changes. We went to some different magnets and some different holders for the style equipment that we were wearing on our vest to be sure we were getting the right angle footage and everything was cohesive when we were looking at downloads and situations like that.
Real quick, if I could just piggyback off what the major said, is entering and labeling the metadata is the most critical part of the body-worn camera system. So you have to develop in your policy a word for word on how to label your metadata. And you need to keep it at that, because when you don't, or you don't follow all the steps, and we're just now going back around, and Brian Palmer's developing strategies and coaching people up, but entering that metadata is critical because you never want to lose a piece of evidence. That would be a difficult conversation.
And I think maybe in some prior calls, was it you, Major Miller, or maybe it was you, Superintendent, talked about don't have too many, or you started out with too many categories and then it got confusing and then you had too many categories to label. If it wasn't either of you, I'm remembering some other call that I had with the site.
We've added categories.
Okay. Chip, anything you want to add here before I move on?
Actually, where my mind was going was exactly where Michael Beebe took us.
Okay.
We had a conversation yesterday about how errors in categorizing or tagging videos can cause tremendous problems. Number one, in what's kept and the volume of what you're keeping, but also in what happens if you mislabel evidence, then you're really caught up. So I wanted to ask, I don't know that state legislation is so directive about categorization in prisons like it is in law enforcement. But I think, Michael, I heard from you what I needed to hear, that this is as critical an issue in corrections as it is anywhere else. And Brittany, we might be well advised to look into this in terms of some technical assistance resources that we might produce.
Thanks, Chip. And I see Dan, one of our body-worn camera experts, has their hand raised. Go ahead, Dan. Oh, let me unmute you. Or Heliana, can you unmute Dan and Zender, please?
Okay, there I am.
There you go.
Regarding that, Chip, one of the things that every state has is a retention schedule set by the state for adherence of all kinds of records, and agencies, to include the correctional facilities, have a responsibility, obviously, if they're independent from another agency, to keep those records, to include body camera records, in accordance with those retention schedules. However, they can also submit changes to the state archivist for those retention schedules. And as you mentioned, this is a huge issue with the retention of all this media. Many agencies just a number of agencies don't want to mess with it. And so they put these, if it's not categorized to a particular crime or associated with a retention, an area in the retention schedule, they just hold it for a designated period of time just to avoid the manual process of going through and clearing out those records.
Thanks, Dan. I think that's an important point. I know we only have 4 minutes left, so I'm going to pause just for a second again. Does anyone else that's participating have comments or questions for our panelists before we pose our last question for today? Okay, the last question actually we'd like to close with, and let's maybe start with you, Ms. Grigsby. What advice would you give to other correctional settings considering implementing body-worn cameras?
Get as many people involved from the initial stage as early as possible, and have open discussions and be open for feedback from all different angles, and be aware of the different processes like they were talking about in evidence.com. You have to assign a process for who's going to enroll the staff, unassign the cameras, assign the camera, view the footage. There's a lot that goes into it, and don't rush the process.
Thank you. Superintendent Beebe, what advice would you give?
Develop a strong team, stick to your plan. People are going to put barriers in your way. You just have to figure out how to get through those barriers. As long as you stick to your plan, you will be successful. You're going to find every excuse in the world to hit pause. Don't hit pause. if you hit pause, you're not going to get that train moving again. Just my opinion.
Major Miller.
I echo what both of them said. T&E these products. There's so many of them out there. Don't just stick to one. Test and eval everything. But like both Tamika and the superintendent said, you've got to have a strong team ready to do this. You can't do it with one or two people, and you've got to have people on board at your agencies that have the same mindset that this is a plus for them. You don't want any negatives within your team, and it'll roll out really easy.
Thank you. Chip, any closing comments from you before I close us out for today?
I'm probably going to take some words out of your mouth, Brittany, but I so very much appreciate the leadership from you folks in your jurisdictions and in this body-worn camera technical assistance program. It's been very valuable to hear from you today and what you have done, again, in your jurisdictions, but also for the benefit of many, many others. It's greatly appreciated, and the fact that you found the time to be with us today, again, can't thank you enough.
Thanks, Chip. And again, I'll just echo what Chip said. Thank you all for participating. Thanks to our panelists for the great session. Our next session is at 3, and I believe they are, it should be this link still. If you want to, we're going to talk about integrating body-worn cameras with other technologies. So stay on. We're ending right on time. As the project manager, I'm going to end us on time for the national meeting. So thank you all so much, and we will see you back here in about 10 minutes. Thank you.